Hey, lovely and generous and supportive Patreon people. This is Nick DiMatteo here. Patreon.com/music is not a genre. Thank you for being a member and a friend and family and fan and all of that stuff. Really does mean a lot. And welcome new members, especially David and Bob. Hey-ho! And as promised, this week's Bonus MxTRA here for the main episode, which was my part 2 of my coverage of boy bands, is on a history of K-pop. It's all K-pop. So I'm going to go way back further than when you think K-pop started, because I always love to do that. Full disclosure, two things. One, I am freaking exhausted and getting slightly dizzy because I overdo it and tend to batch cook these in a way that is overwhelming. And this is like my it's going to be like 3.5 hours of recording, and I'm not even done for the week. I've got another like hour and a half later this week. And second thing is more germane here is I've been a fan of J-pop since probably around when the term was coined in 1988. Shonen Knife was a big favorite of mine, and they're still around. And I'll probably do an episode on J-pop someday, the Japanese popular music, not just pop. That's a misnomer in terms of it's not just pop music. It's pop, any music is popular there. So rock too. But K-pop has so far had a far larger global reach and is more directly related to the main episode about boy bands. So that's why I'm doing this. It's also huge right now. And also, and I'll mention this a little bit later, was originally influenced by J-pop. So I found that there would be far too much to cover in the boy band episode on all the Korean bands, and some of it would stray from boy bands proper, not to mention all the female K-pop artists, some of which I will cover next week's episode on girl groups. So K-pop deserves its own spotlight. And I've also enjoyed a lot of the music, honestly, for the last 10 to 15 years. This will be a survey of its history. I'm not going to mention every single band or artist from K-pop, of course, starting far before it emerged as a thing, which you'll find out when it emerged as a thing. Again, which I think when it emerges even earlier than you think. Prehistory. Of course, Korean popular music has been around long before K-pop became popular. It's a lot of pop, pop, pop. Korean music itself has as long and rich a history as any other country. This is not about traditional Korean music, folk or classical or any of that, but a little dip into the prehistory. Korean pop music started to form as far back as the late 1800s, when American missionary Henry Appenzeller taught American and British folk songs in Korean schools, using Western music but adapting it with Korean lyrics. It took a while for the culture and technology to develop, and so the first Korean pop album that we know of was Ipungjin Sewo, which means This Tumultuous Time, by Park Chae-seon and Lee Ryu-seik in 1925. Was that the birth of K-pop? More recordings and development would occur, including influences from Japan and even from American gospel music, and I'm sure elsewhere. But the true prehistory of K-pop starts when the Western world exerted an even greater influence on the region during the Korean War in the 1950s. After the Korean War, South Korea was flooded with American cultural influence through U.S. military bases and USO shows featuring famous U.S. artists like Nat King Cole and Louis Armstrong, among many others, Marilyn Monroe. Korean musicians adapted this and began to perform jazz, swing, country, doo-wop, and early rock for American troops. It's a good way to make money. And they loved the music, helping create the foundations of modern Korean popular music. And through the rest of the 50s and 60s, clubs featuring this music and the music itself spread more and more and more. And this was happening more all over the world. Think of skiffle in Britain in the 1950s and early 60s, due to early globalization. Easier air travel, more cross-cultural exchange, easier technology to reproduce and distribute music. So then we get to the 1950s post-war foundations, the important artists from that decade that I can, suss out. Kim Sisters, one of Korea's first internationally successful acts. They performed American pop standards, and they performed in Las Vegas and on U.S. television, including multiple appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show. They sang in English and Korean, but, very much in English, and were a vocal harmony group. So those were two significant factors that predated actual K-pop music, is that they also sang in English and they were a vocal harmony group. Hyun-in was a major early post-war singer who blended Korean and Western vocal styles. And Lee Nan-young, though her career began earlier, her emotional trot singing style is very flourishing, kind of ballad singing, influenced by Japan. It comes from Japan. It's very intense. It heavily influenced later Korean pop, that emotional content, the mellifluous content. Key trends here in the 50s, American jazz and big band influence, rock and roll, trot music, dominance from Japan, U.S. military club performance service, early vocal harmony groups. Of course, the Beatles sped up this influence everywhere, and by the 1960s, rock bands were popping up. So we get to 1960s, the rock and television era. Television became widespread in South Korea, helping create national stars and spreading the word about everything. Rock music, surf music, and psychedelic influences entered Korean pop through American and British trends, as well as folk and protest music. Some important artists: Shin Jung-hyun, often called the godfather of Korean rock. He pioneered Korean psychedelic rock and modern electric guitar music. He started Korea's first rock band that we know of, Ad 4. Interesting to me that so many Korean bands have numbers in their name, and numbers in conjunction with words often considered or written out as one word. Ad 4 was from the freaking 1960s and did it. Key Boys was another rock band from that period. Pearl Sisters were a glamorous dance-oriented duo considered a precursor to later idol groups. And I'll mention more about what idol groups are later on. They primarily came from Japan, but, obviously Korea. And the Pearl Sisters were a precursor to that. When you think of idol type performing, IDOL, then you kind of get the idea. Kim Chu-ja, a bold, charismatic performer who brought soul and psychedelic influences into Korean pop. So the key trends: a rise of Korean rock, TV music competitions. So they started way earlier than we realize. Go-go dance culture and psychedelic and soul influences. And by the end of the 60s and into the 70s, youth culture was popping up and following the hippies' lead. More westernization in both sound and styles. Several famous singers in this era include Han Dae-soo, who was actually raised in the U.S. and then brought his influence back to Korea until he was banned, after which he moved to NYC until the 90s and then was allowed back and finally went back to his home country, or the country he considers home. 1970s, folk, protest, and youth culture. The authoritarian government censored much of pop culture, but youth music exploded anyway. Acoustic folk, singer-songwriters, and emotionally expressive ballads became popular. One artist I mentioned in my international episode is Cho Young-pil, one of the most important figures in Korean music history, blending rock, ballads, trot, and synth pop. I covered him in that episode, and I got to tell you, his range of styles is just absolutely incredible. So check it out. Sung Chang-sik, major folk icon associated with youth counterculture. Sanul Rim, influential experimental rock trio with a rawer sound than mainstream Korean pop. Worth listening to. The key trends in the 70s: folk boom, protest music, singer-songwriter culture, government censorship, and the reaction against that, growth of youth identity in music, and also DJs were becoming popular, which is another key factor in the development of K-pop. Electronifying music. And that's the prehistory. Let's get to the history of K-pop. Though K-pop didn't really congeal and emerge and even have a name until 1999, the modern history of it actually starts a bit earlier, when the sounds, styles, and presentations started to form in ways we'd now recognize as K-pop. Think of how New Kids on the Block sounds enough like NSYNC and BTS for us to understand it's the same basic form and lineage. So let's hit up the 1980s and 90s. And keep in mind, every artist I discuss is streaming. So please take these recommendations. So 1980s, dance pop and modernization. South Korea modernized rapidly, and that's, things started opening up more. There were still bands, but it wasn't as restrictive. Pop music became more polished and commercial. Synthesizers, electronic drums, flashy stage performance became central. All important things for K-pop. Again, important artists here. Cho Young-pil, I have to mention him again, started in the late 60s rock surge, but he's included here again because his sound shifted to 80s synth and dance, and he has had lots of crossover success, at least through the 2010s. I would recommend the songs Bounce and Short Hair, which are both very different from different eras of his career. Lee Moon-se was a massive ballad singer, started in 1978 and still going. Helped define emotional Korean ballad music, influencing how some K-pop ballads would be sung. I recommend Spring Breeze. Pretty freaking awesome indie rock pop. Kim Won-soon started in 86 and was soon dubbed the Korean Madonna for her dance pop image and performance style. Her sound and style were great influences on K-pop. Listen to the dance in the rhythm. So it's like dark Madonna new wave. So Bangcha, often mentioned in the history of K-pop as precursors, from 87 to 90, a little blip in the mid 90s as well, and then from 05 to 2012. One of Korea's first major choreographed boy bands. True proto K-pop pioneers, they were the prototype for most future K-pop bands. Very new wave electro pop rock. My favorites are Top Secret and On the Phone, so stream those. So synth pop was a real big part of the 80s, as was dance choreography. And early idol aesthetics were being incorporated even more. Again, we'll get to that soon. And an even more increase in Western influence. And then we get to the 1990s, the building of actual K-pop structures. Keep in mind that Japan had already started going through this after World War II, so it was ahead of the game, pop music-wise, and especially in its spread around the world. And that's one reason why J-pop emerged first. But that's not the only connection to Japan. As illustrated in the boy band episode, K-pop acts routinely also release Japanese albums and singles and consider that a major market. And that's because a lot of the influence of K-pop's music and how it developed its disciplines and templates came from Japan's idol system, which was long-standing by the 90s, that selected and trained artists in music and dance and, being public facing and all that, run by agencies who controlled and marketed all of the artists going through this J-pop boot camp, idol boot camp. And the K-pop system is directly modeled on that. Japan is a huge part of the K-pop story. That started more or less in the 90s in Korea. True beginning K-pop before it even had a name. But the turning point here came when Seo Taiji and Boys debuted in 1992 because they mixed not just pop and dance music and youth lyrics, but they also mixed New Jack and hip-hop and even metal. They transformed Korean music overnight. They were a revelation. Their run was 92 to 96, very short. They were one of the first to incorporate any rap into their music. They are the template K-pop group, even though they weren't strictly K-pop, but they basically were. Even more Western influence than the 80s, including in their fashion and dancing. They were the first to make dance a bigger part of their shows. Not the first to dance, but they were a very big part of the shows. Hardcore 90s hip-hop sound. I was surprised how much I really loved it. Listen to Come Back Home. Listen to Seo Taiji and Boys' song Come Back Home. And listen to I Know. It's very New Kids on the Block. In fact, I added both to my playlist for the year. That's how much I like them. HOT, 1996 to 2001, then a brief reunion in the 2010s. They were the first modern K-pop idol group because they were created by SM Entertainment that I mentioned in the main episode. They took the template set by Seo Taiji and Boys and codified it through the idol bootcamp discipline. Funky electro-pop. Candy is a very cool song, bit of ska in there even, which I like ska. Sex Keys, which is SECHSKIES, 1997 to 2000, and then 2016 to 2021. Another in that first wave of K-pop bands who were directly influenced by Seo Taiji and Boys. They were rivals of HOT, which of course means similar sound and styles, but developed and owned by a different company. Very Backstreet sounding, soft, funky R&B pop. Try the song Couple pretty decent. SES, 1997-2002, and then a brief reunion in the 2010s. Lest we forget that K-pop groups are not just boy bands. This group is widely considered to be the first K-pop girl group, SES. I will mention them in the girl group episode next week. Same label as HOT and considered their female counterparts. Think female Backstreet Boys or Spice Girls in terms of sound. 'Cause I'm Your Girl is a good song from them. Finn KL, 1998-2002, and then a couple of reunions. Another seminal girl group on the same label as HOT and SES. They were rivals of SES, as massively successful as the others here, and just as influential as in establishing K-pop as a force to be reckoned with, and girl groups in particular. They're kind of like Ace of Base. Now is a good song that kind of sounds like that. And then Eternal Love kind of sounds like early hyperpop to me. And then you have G.O.D. Groove Overdose, 1999-2005, and then 2014 to present. Massively popular boy band, established the next wave through the early 2000s. If you consider Sex Kiss and HOT the first true wave, think NSYNC and good rapping, as G.O.D. Groove Overdose is the next, as a kind of the next wave. Friday Night is a highlight song for me. And of course, there are plenty of others, as there were in the 1980s and will be in subsequent decades, but these lists are all fairly representative. So big takeaways from the 90s. Idol, boot camp system was being put in place, never to be, strayed from. Fan clubs popped up, lots of integration of rap and choreography to the max, music videos. Now we get into modern K-pop. So the 80s and 90s are like precursor K-pop. Right? Modern K-pop, again, 1999 was when the term was coined. The 80s and 90s were hugely developmental and bring together all the remaining elements that would eventually constitute K-pop. And as you heard, some legit K-pop groups actually started in the 90s. But the true dawning was 1999 when the form was named and when the turn of the century would bring the slow infiltration of modern K-pop stars into the rest of the world to the point where by the 2000s it was making the news in the late 2000s, if not the charts. So before we get to the 21st century and now that all the elements are in place, let's do a proper definition of K-pop. Like J-pop before it, the term itself is shorthand for Korean popular music. So in general, it refers to pop music from South Korea. But keep in mind that like all other general pop music, it encompasses far more than one genre or style. Although I will say that K-pop's scope is narrower to me than J-pop's, which is it's fine. I think is a pretty accurate observation. Those styles are almost all Western U.S. derived, and most commonly they are pop, hip hop, EDM, R&B, and sometimes some elements of rock, jazz, and some culturally specific South Korean sounds. Though not as many as you would think. But then again, that's probably why they're one of the more successful countries to cross over into the U.S. than others. Regardless of the breadth of the stylistic flourishes, all K-pop has three things in common. Heavy Western influence filtered through Asia, catchy melodies and hooks. Why did I say three? Oh, I said three, but I meant these things. Dance-oriented, especially in its tightly choreographed performances, coming from years of training through the Idol system. Most songs, like boy band, girl group, and pop songs in general, are either about love or empowerment. High visual element, especially in fashion, but in music videos and streaming. And finally, more often than not, it's multilingual, incorporating Korean with English or Japanese, Chinese even, depending on the market. Now that we understand what K-pop is and sounds like, let's dive into the first full true era of it. 2000s. The Hallyu wave goes global. Korean entertainment exports explode across Asia in what became known as the Hallyu or Korean wave. Companies like SM, who I've mentioned, YG, and JYP perfected the Idol bootcamp system, factory system. Important artists from the 2000s. BOA started in 2000 and are still going. Often called, she is still going. Often called the queen of K-pop. was one of the first to have huge success outside of Korea, in particular in Japan, and one of the first to have U.S. world chart success starting in 2012, still releasing music. Kind of proof of concept that K-pop could be marketed elsewhere. She's an electro-pop singer-songwriter sound. Very nice, actually. Only one is a fave of mine. TVXQ, or Toho Shinki in Japan, 2003 to present. It's K-pop 5-piece, which is now a duo. Also proved success outside of Korea was possible. Also charted U.S. World in 2012. More hardcore, funky electropop, like how when Backstreet went harder. The song Why, Keep Your Head Down. Very dark, good song. Love it. Super Junior, formed in 2005, still going. Boy band that started with 13 members. It's down to 10 now. So probably the first to that mega-sized template. One of the first on this list to have U.S. world chart success in 2009. And charted there as recently as 2021. They still release music. Extremely synthy electro EDM. Mr. Simple is a favorite of mine. So is Express Mode. Probably my favorite of theirs. Big Bang, all one word. 2006, 2018, and then 2022 to present. 5-piece boy band, now only 3. They were dubbed the kings of K-pop. Not the first band to incorporate rap, but likely the first to display hip-hop swagger and style. And they self-produced, like Stray Kids. First on this list to have U.S. world chart success, any of the bands, starting in 2007. Charted there as recently as 2022. Super EDM sound with rap. Bang 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 is amazing. And Fantastic Baby is also very cool. Girls' Generation, who I'll mention next week, 2007 to 2017, and then 2022 to present. You have to figure many of these K-pop groups reformed once they saw how successful BTS was. That's a definitive second-generation girl group, originally 9 and now 8 members. Very throwbacky electro dance pop. Genie is cool. Wonder Girls, 2007 to 17, 5-member girl group, the first K-pop artist of any to chart on the actual U.S. charts in 2009. Their song Nobody was number 76 main and number 4 U.S. Heat. Whatever the hell that is. So many charts. They were the canaries in the coal mine, really, which apparently coal is now renewable energy, you frickin' jerks. Part of this is because they were one of the first to deliberately release English singles. Good song, by the way, that song Nobody. Electro pop loveliness. Rewind is also very good. Rain, the artist Rain. You can't have a conversation about K-pop without mentioning Rain. Started in the boy band Fan Club in 98, which failed. Restarted as a solo artist in 2002 and is still going. One of the only early K-pop artists that people here can actually name. Is still a major superstar, a la Timberlake, throughout the world. Though he's never charted in the U.S. that I know of, he was the first to make an impactful appearance here after Colbert had him on his show in 2008. It was a fake rivalry. Though I'd been hearing about K-pop for a few years by 2008, and both HOT and BOA had performed in the States in 2000 and 2003 respectively, Rain's popularity and the following year's chart entrance of Wonder Girls were the 1-2 punch that sped up momentum for what was to come. And Rain's was the first any American could name drop from Korea until the next guy I'll discuss in 2010, so you will very much know. The song Magnetic is very nice R&B ballad, kind of mostly crooning on top of a New Jack kind of sound, and Rain's not my favorite. The key things in the 2000s, they expanded into Japan and China and dipped their toes in the U.S. They started to gain internet fans, YouTube promotion, highly more polished idol systems. Whatever else happened crossover-wise in the 2000s, it was the 2010s when K-pop became a true global cultural phenomenon. 2000s is when it was building. Some of these acts I mentioned in the main episode or will mention in next week's girl group episode, so I'm not going to go too into them here. 2010's global mainstream breakthrough. K-pop became a worldwide phenomenon thanks to social media, streaming, and increasingly sophisticated production. Some important artists: Psy, PSY, 1999 to present. If you don't know his name, then you've had no interest in this or K-pop or any pop music for over a decade. He started releasing singles in 2001, but didn't enter the U.S. market in any way until 2010. He hit a US World number 6 right now. And then, of course, 2012, he released Gangnam Style, the first YouTube video to reach 1 billion views, the first top 10 US hit for any Korean artist at number 2, but number 1 US World, one of the most streamed songs. Then number 5 in 2013, Gentleman, US main, and number 26, Hangover in 2014. Both of those were number 1 US World. Couple of other US main songs through 2022. Any inroads and mentions and other impacts before this meant nothing and would have been considered novelty anomalies who would have come and gone and said, remember K-pop, Rain and Wonder Girls included? Until Psy in Gangnam Style. His big hit put K-pop on the map indefinitely and far predated BTS's US main chart success, which didn't start until 2017. Other than the hits, check out more, other than the hits I mentioned of Psy, check out more recent song, That, produced by and featuring Suga of BTS. Nice connection there. Continuing with solo artists in the 2010s, IU. She started in 2008 and is still going. Singer-songwriter, hugely respected. Never been on the US main, but has charted US World since 2011 with most of those songs in the top 10. Incredibly nice sound. One of my surprise favorites on this list. I love the songs Lilac and Love Wins All. Shiny, who I mentioned, so I won't dive too deep here. I mentioned them in the main episode. They formed in 2008 and are still going. They started charting US World in 2013. Almost all top 5 hits through 2025 US World, possibly the second most successful boy band behind BTS in the States and maybe anywhere, I think. Though still not well known, my son knew them. Known for experimental music and advanced choreography, EDM pop, basically. I like Ring Ding Ding and Don't Call Me. EXO, again, mentioned them in the main episode, so I won't dive too deep here. They started in 2012. US World been charting since then on that. Never been on the US main, but continue to be a force. They seem to be poised to infiltrate the US markets. I don't know if they're being marketed here, though. They have a more brooding sound, which I prefer in many ways. Monster is a very cool song. BTS, again, I'm not going to dive deep here because the main episode I covered them. Started in 2013. They've had tons of US World Top 10 hits. Since 2017 have been a constant and very successful US main presence. Took the map setter Gangnam Style, that was still more than anything a novelty, even though it was amazingly successful, and proved that music could be taken seriously and have lasting impact. I've enjoyed a bunch of their tunes, and I really love their new hit, Swim. Twice, all caps. It's a 9-member girl group started in 2015, similar to EXO. Never had US main chart success, and I'd never heard of them prior to this research, but have scored a ton of US World Top 10s, most of which have landed in the top 5. Then started charting US main 2021 finally, and their 2025 single Takedown hit number 21. Was in the movie. It was in it was in K-Pop Demon Hunter. It's likely with the success of K-Pop Demon Hunter and that music that Twice will continue to have hits. Strategy was featured in that film, and I like it. And I also like This Is For. Very well-known band, Blackpink. Huge and hugely well-known here. Girl group, 2016 to present, started charting on US main in 2018, one of the first US main, and have had 5 top 40 hits since then, including Ice Cream, number 13 in 2020 with Selena Gomez. Continue to release music and have success and are probably the only other current K-pop band casual listeners can name. If 9 Inch Nails was a pop girl group, that's the sound. Great rapping, too, added to that, especially on Go, a single from this year. Champion is cool, too, and very different. So the trend here in the 2010s, Twitter and YouTube fandoms, global touring, partnerships with luxury fashions, fusing genres, streaming era. As I mentioned in the boy band episode, and is also true for girl groups, and I'll mention next week, by the end of the 2010s, the only super successful pop group music was coming from Korea, setting the stage for our current decade. 2020s. This decade, hyper global K-pop. K-pop is now a permanent part of global pop culture, with increasingly multinational groups, English language releases, TikTok virality, and cross-border collaborations. Some important artists from this decade 17. Started in 2015. Mentioned them in the main episode, so check that for more details. It's a boy band celebrated for synchronized choreography and self-production. Have not charted in the U.S. main yet, but almost every single through the last year has so far charted top 10 U.S. world. Very EDM sound. Thunder is such a cool song, and so is Hot. Rosé, 2016 to present, another name you might know because she was in Pata Pata with Bruno Mars. Maybe the only other artist on this whole list to have started charting U.S. main from the get-go. Her first single, maybe the only artist, period, on this list to have started charting U.S. main from the get-go, because her first single, 2021, went number 70, and then up to number 3, 2024, and a few also, but lower charting since then. There will be more from her. Sounds kind of like Sabrina Carpenter or other stuff like that. Very good. Toxic Till the End is my favorite of hers. Stray Kids, one of my favorites from this decade, 2017 to present, boy band, covered in the main episode. Started charting U.S. World in 2017, most in the top 5 U.S. World, including this year's number 4, Stay, and one of the very few artists to have also charted in the U.S. main, having a handful of lower charting songs starting in 2023. Self-produced aggressive electronic sound, Chick Chick Boom, I Frickin' Love, and Divine. ATEEZ, ATEEZ, 2018 to present's boy band. I've heard of them for some reason. I don't know why. Done lots of global tours. Many U.S. world charting hits, including the number 1 Adrenaline this year. Very good dark song. And a couple lower charting U.S. main songs last year became major global touring acts. I also like their song In Your Fantasy. aespa, AESPA, started in 2020. They're a girl group known for popularizing the metaverse concept and leaning into hyperpop. They have not had a single chart U.S. main, but 7 have charted top 10 U.S. world and 2 others just outside of the top 10. Great production. I love their sound. I really like Whiplash and Supernova, which I believe were also part of songs by Liz Phair. New Jeans started in 2022, and so far they stopped last year, but I think it's because of a legal thing, and they'll probably get back together. They can be considered a new wave in both music and style, even newer than any that I've previously mentioned, and have had several U.S. main charting singles, actually. New Jeans. I hope they continue. Super Shy is a great song. Les Seraphim, and it's 2 S's, Seraphim, so I guess angels. 2022 to present, a girl group. I'll mention them next week. They've had tremendous global success. They have not yet been on the U.S. main charts, but every single has hit top 20 in the U.S. world, and all but 1 is in the top 10, including 3 number 1s. Representing the increasingly international and fashion-oriented direction of K-pop, just like New Jeans. Listen to Spaghetti, very distinctive ambient techno sound, and I also like their song Crazy. So key trends, globalization really, and virtual experimentation, global fandom and global touring, and multinational membership is another important one. So some conclusions. Public service announcement here is increasing conversations about labor conditions and mental health. There's been corruption and abuse in this realm, as there has been in boy band and girl groups and pretty much everywhere in the arts. And that includes the idol system. Know that in extremely large part, the artists themselves are blameless. As usual, it's the money and power people fucking things up for everybody else. It does not take away from the quality of the music or the artists. Before we get to some conclusions, including why K-pop is so popular, we need to discuss why J-pop didn't take off globally. I've always wondered this, since Japan has had such a head start and such an influence. The main reason can be broken down into 2 contrasting elements. Number 1, Japan itself is already such a large market, and anybody who's visited Tokyo and Kyoto, Osaka can attest to how much Western influence is there. Music companies and artists are already making enough money and gaining enough fame to not have to focus on the rest of the world. This is often referred to as Galapagos syndrome, prioritizing local success over global. Nothing wrong with that. And number 2 reason, despite the Western influence that has kept the hunger for J-pop so vibrant in Japan, J-pop sound is still much more localized than K-pop's, meaning it retains more cultural quirks. If you recall my international episode and how I noted that most countries' biggest stars, however much they've taken on Western music tropes, still sounded regional in many ways, even if they were singing in English, true for J-pop. Not all of it, but more recently. With K-pop, the industry and the artists have consistently tried to westernize the music as much as possible, while J-pop, it's more of a hybrid. And this, in essence, answers the other question, why is K-pop so huge? It took its cues from J-pop's massively successful idol system and built on that an aesthetic of ultra-westernization, even more Western than some of the Western acts, like meta Western. Though another important note is the music still keeps enough of its Korean identity, even if just in the language, to make it that much more interesting to American and other Western listeners. K-pop also always strives to keep up with the times and reinvent itself. And more often, K-pop artists are working with US and UK producers and collaborating with Western artists, further extending their integration. Bottom line is, this is music worth listening to. Music with a rich history, as you now know, farther back than you would think, and many flavors and many choices. And the cultural barriers, as minimal as they are in this case, shouldn't stop you from exploring beyond BTS even. Okay, most iconic K-pop acts in the 1990s and 2010s, because we know the 2020s already. So let's say the most iconic 1990s, Seo Taiji and Boys, H.O.T. Hot, and SES. Those were, to me, the most iconic K-pop acts in the 90s, or pre-K-pop, K-pop. 2000s, G.O.D., Groove Overdrive, BOA, she's incredible, Wonder Girls, I like a lot, and of course, Rain. And then 2010s, you gotta go Psy, BTS, Blackpink, Shiny, big. 2020s, also BTS, Blackpink, Shiny to a degree, but also Stray Kids and aespa, A-E-S-P-A again. Look them up. That's why I spell it. I want you to look them up. Those are the ones I say are really, I'm spotlighting here. Questions. Have you heard any K-pop other than Gangnam Style? How long have you been aware of K-pop? Since before that song or after, or only when BTS started? What artists, if any, are you interested in exploring now? I'd love to know the answers to all of these questions and more, because as always, my objectives here are music, conversation, and connection. Thank you for hanging for this massive, is it massive? Yes. Bonus episode. I will talk to you next week.